What's up, everybody? This is Jose from Southern Life. On today's video, we're going to explore Lewiston, Maine. This town has the largest French community in the United States, and it also has some astonishing poverty for the state of Maine. So this is literally the worst town in Maine by poverty rates, and let's explore it. Let's see what it's about. Maine doesn't come to the question. It's not your typical place that you would think of as a worst hood, but this is the worst hood in Maine. Roughly hasn't grown since about the 1940s, which is about typical for some of these larger cities in Maine. As you can see, lots of abandoned buildings and stuff like that already everywhere. Lots of graffiti and abandoned buildings, so it's already looking like an awesome place for urban exploration. I'm seeing whatever we saw. We saw what we saw. Businesses are actually boarded up, shut down. It's actually like has a bad reputation. It's more of like as I've talked to people here in Maine, they've told me that this is like a bad place. Like, you know, as I've talked to people in Maine, they've told me that this town is really kind of the worst that this state has to offer as far as, you know, hoods and poverty. So we'll explore it and see what it's about. Like, but what I've heard is, like, as far as poverty and stuff, this is in fact the worst hood in Maine. And again, that's possibly not a title you would associate with the state of Maine, but it is what's going on here. Wow. They're here. What are they angry about? They're not angry at somebody over there. Yeah, when you think about hoods, Maine isn't probably... I think there's also, I read a little bit about the town. There's a huge Somali population here. So there's this isn't diversity for a normal place, but for Maine, it's diversity. And we got the ski mask with the weed hat. I'm good, bro. We got the ski mask on with the weed hat. Definitely grimy looking stuff out here. A weed ski mask. Sometimes people only look at some analytics. Like, for example, a lot of people have just looked at the analytics of safety. It has the lowest murder rate. Okay, that's good. That's great, actually. Nobody wants to die. Except for rappers. They try to get shot at. But anybody other than a rapper, you don't want to die. Most of us don't. People look at... Unfortunately, they assume because an area has a white population predominantly that it's a good thing. However, there's a lot of analytics people don't take into account for Maine. For one, they forget to take into account the analytics of overdose rates. And Maine's overdose rate is among the worst in the United States. How bad is the overdose rate in Maine? About 3 times higher than the state of Texas. So you are 3 times more likely to overdose here in Maine than you are in Texas. That, my friends, is a bad analytic. 47 out of 100,000 people overdose, making it higher than Florida, making it 3 times higher than Texas. Only a handful of states have a higher overdose rate than Maine. Those states being West Virginia, Kentucky, race, and crime, and they assume that, well, that's all there is to see or know. But in reality, there's a lot more to know, and the Somali population here is probably bigger than what we saw on the internet. It looks like the population of Somali here is pretty big. I can kind of tell Somalis because I lived in Lewiston, Kentucky, and we had a Somali population, so I kind of know what they look like and stuff without a prejudice. I actually know because, again, I lived in Lewiston, Kentucky, where we have a large Somali population. Other cities with large Somali populations are Louisville and Memphis have large Somali populations. I think Detroit might as well. Not sure on that. But interestingly enough, this town definitely has the stamps of what a bad neighborhood would be. Which is basically high population density, rundown housing, a lot of litter. This has all the stamps of a bad neighborhood are here. And whether people believe it or not, there are, in fact, bad hoods in Maine. Kind of an odd expectation. That does exist. Nice house right here. They don't really have easements on the roads here, so as you're driving, you could easily pull out in front of a road and not see anything. Just hope that oncoming traffic sees you and stops. I'm not quick to label a place safe if they have a very high overdose rate. A state that has just a high overdose rate and then label it the safest state, because that doesn't make sense. They're being murdered by the drugs they're taking. So from my personal perspective, I wouldn't label Maine the safest state. Not with an overdose rate that freaking high. You know, it's among the highest in the country. That's a problem. And how they have a lot of a drug addiction and it doesn't lead to crime, I'm not sure. But if people are overdosing at those rates, it means there's a lot of illegal substances floating. And if the police is not arresting people for it, it means the cops are looking the other way. So just because it's not being reported doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So me, personally, I can't sit here and say that I would label Maine the safest place to live, because that's too high. Same thing with West Virginia. And we are... This would almost suggest somebody homeless is sleeping back here. Looks like the vehicle's disabled. I can see there's a tire off on that vehicle. And again, with Maine having just a high overdose rate, there could be somebody in that car right now that's out. You know what I mean? Like, let me see if I can get close without putting myself in danger. The vehicle's just in a very precarious spot, man. And hey, you're good. Okay. Yeah, good, bro? All right, bro. Just making sure, brother. Yeah. But yeah, when you're looking for a place, to see if it's bad or dangerous, it's good to look at murder rates. Low, that's great, but there's a lot more than just low murder rates to a place being safe or dangerous. Yes, murder rates are high on the list of priorities without a fact. I mean, you're not going to excuse having a high murder rate anyway. There's no way around it. If your place wherever you live has a high murder rate, there's no way around it. That's horrible. You could have every other category of crime can be low, but if you have a high murder rate, you got a high murder rate. There's no way around that. But it's not the only thing you need to look at. I mean, overdose rates to me are super important as well. And it's weird how a place will be labeled as, so it's the safest state in the country by everybody. Oh, it's the safest place in the country. Safest place, safest place. People are dying left and right from overdoses. That, to me, doesn't check out right. And sometimes you have to read the fine print as well and just kind of get the whole picture, because sometimes we're fed just and I'm doing this so you guys don't, so that you're not stupid, because a lot of times people fail to see the whole picture. They see part of the picture and they really miss the whole package. I hate how there's downtowns a one-way. See here. I want to drive through the downtown. You guys can see all these historic buildings. There are towns like this that are dealing with a lot of problems, and a lot of people that I've talked to have ignorantly told me along the lines of, well, there's migrants here, so that's why it's bad. Here's the problem with that. If you were to take a look, and I haven't done it, but take a look at who is overdosing, I can guarantee you, almost certainly guarantee you, that the migrant community is not the predominant people that are overdosing. I can almost guarantee you. Not saying it's the case, but look into that. people say, well, it's the immigrants who are destroying the place. I'm like, okay, so who's overdosing? Well, like in Florida, whites are overdosing at a rate 2 times higher than blacks, 3 times higher than Hispanics. But then the whites will say, a lot of people, not the whites, like some people who are white who are stupid and ignorant and who are trying to analytically prove that their racism is founded on facts, which anybody knows really who's overdosing, or predominantly, both analytic and generally we understand who's being affected by that problem. Prove their racism analytically by saying, well, there's more crime where there's immigrant communities. Auburn, let's say the country of Auburn, the average height in Auburn is 8 feet tall. Okay, and Auburn plays against Lewiston. In Lewiston, the average height is 4 feet tall. And Auburn decides that they're going to play a basketball game. Who do you think is going to win? Obviously, the taller people are going to win. So it's like, if you decide the metrics, you can decide the winner. Or something else, then the shorter people might have an advantage, or a different sport. I don't know. In a different sport, the short people might have an advantage. You know what I mean? But it's like, if you decide the metric, you decide the winner. And I think the way we look at analytics in the United States, this isn't something I pulled out of my butt. This is something that I've been perplexing upon since my last road trip to Canada, because I realized that in Canada they don't measure analytics the same way we do in the United States. They don't look at analytics the same. They use different terminologies, different words, different things. So in the United States we say race. In Canada they say ethnicity. So it's a different way of measuring things up in other countries. And I've been reflecting on that, because as I'm doing my videos in Canada, they measure things differently. They use kilometers instead of miles. They use ethnicity instead of race. And I've kind of come to the conclusion that in the United States, the way we typically measure things, you're almost letting somebody win by default. Like, for example, Canada's a whole lot safer than the United States, but it's also got cold weather. And a lot of the states in the United States that are safer are also close to Canada. So geography and weather play a huge role in crime, and it's actually proven. But those people that talk about safety, they never mention overdose rates. But me, I have to make an exception for Maine. I have to make an exception for Kentucky and West Virginia, and labeling those places safe, because if you have this many overdoses, you clearly have a crime problem. Because to have an overdose, you have to have a crime first, which is usually addiction. And usually addiction comes along other crimes like possession and sale and distribution. So if you have an overdose problem, you also have an addiction problem. You also have a use problem. You have a possession problem, and you have a distribution problem. But the only side of the coin you're seeing is the overdose rate. Well, what about the possession? What about the distribution? That's all part of the crimes. So you can have an area where you're seeing the result, which is the overdose, marked analytically, but from a police perspective, you're not seeing the arrest, the crimes that go along with that. Kind of suspicious. Police profiling has actually protected Hispanic and black communities. They may be more cautious about possession, and whites a lot of times are not being profiled, so they feel that they can get away with it more. I've actually met people here in Maine say things like, we're going to send troops to Texas, to the southern border, because they have a problem. The southern border, they're burger, eat a burger. No, dude, you don't want a problem. Texas drug overdose rate is 1/3 of yours. But you're going to send your people to Texas? Does that make any sense? Texas has 1/3 of your overdose rates. People here are dying 3 times more from drug overdoses. But you're going to send people to Texas where they don't have a problem because you have a problem. So somebody else is to blame for somebody 3,000 miles away is to blame for your problem. That makes a lot of sense. Oh, no, it doesn't. Analytically prove that their racism is right. But you go to Canada, and you'll see Asian, Arab communities with crime rates so low, you'll never find anything like that in the United States. Because in the United States, you've already determined who the winner's going to be. You've already determined who the winner's going to be. If you make the rules, you make the winner. Winning by default. But the truth remains the same. Maine has a huge problem with addiction, and I can't agree with the people that say it's a safe place. Just because it's being overlooked because of who the perpetrator is, it doesn't exactly mean it's not happening.